Hello, Emergent fam. Welcome to this M Library broadcast. We are speaking with Lisa Givan. She's the Chief Diversity Officer at Indiana Tech, and I'm not going to steal any of her thunder, letting herself position herself however she'd like to. My name's Daniel. Many of you know who I am. If you don't, I'm one of the co-founders of Emergent, which is a learning and development platform and catalyst for young professionals. So super glad you're joining us. Lisa, do you want to start just by telling us a little bit about who you are and the work that you do?
Sure. Lisa Givan. I am the Associate Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at Indiana Tech. I have been working in some type of diversity and inclusion for close to 30 years. Started my journey in corporate America when it was known back there as multicultural affairs, and transitioned to higher ed about 16, 17 years ago. But I'm still a learner. As many people like to say, I'm a leader. I'm a learner as well as a leader, and I appreciate that. I don't want to take time explaining what I do, as I want to get into the conversation. So if we can help others or pour into others, then we're not lacking in time. So
I love it. I love that spirit. Well, we were emailing back and forth just the other day, checking in, and you mentioned the word authenticity, which I had been thinking about a lot. It's one of the tenets of kind of our growth platform here at Emergent. You can't grow well from a root system that's not well established, right? And authenticity is part of that root system. So you started talking about it while I was thinking about it, and I thought, man, I got to get her on the phone and we got to jam on some of this stuff. So, all right. So as we get started thinking about authenticity, I think the right place to start is defining what we mean by authenticity, right? And so I want to let you do that work and construct an ethos or an idea of, when I say authenticity, what does that mean to you, and what are you talking about when, as we start this conversation and start using that word? What do we mean?
Right. So I think for me, authenticity is this great combination of self-awareness and self-acceptance. And then mixed with a little bit of discernment. I have to own Lisa. I have to look at the person in the mirror daily and be okay with who that person is. And I think if you don't master that or attempt to at least work on it, there's so much room for emotional and mental distress in your life if you're always trying to please someone else. So I acknowledge my whole self. I bring my whole self with confidence and conviction on who I am. I don't necessarily conform all the time, but I do have a sense of emotional intelligence. But basically, I live my truth. I know I'm not perfect. I try to assist those who may be a little impaired with exposing them to others' truth so that we can implement best practices and move along and work together, right? Especially during a time like this. I think, you're not really privy to all the meetings after the meetings. So you really need someone who you can trust and who's relational enough with you that you understand that they're looking out for you when the doors are closed. Can't necessarily share everything with you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. You said a couple things I really want to come back to. One of them, I'm always looking, I think Chris and I talk about this a lot, but that wisdom lies in the tension between two ideas usually. And so you talked about, I live my truth and I have a sense of emotional intelligence and sort of appropriate, or I want to come back to that idea, the tension of juggling those two things. But before we do that, you said, I got to live with the person in the mirror. And I'm just curious, is that a literal thing for you? Or when you think about authenticity, you think, I'm looking in the mirror every day? What does that mean for you?
I do. I believe that when there's responsibility on you, or even if there's not, we often think that we don't have a we're not responsible. There's no responsibility on our behalf, especially as emerging, new professionals or just the younger generation. But there's always someone looking to you. And so there's this responsibility that if I conform to what others are telling me to do and telling me to be, and this image that when you go, especially in the age of social media, of what the perfect self is, none of us are perfect. I have to be okay accepting my shortcomings and owning the fact that I'm great in some areas, and there are some areas that I am totally on a journey for.
Mm.
Even in the work of diversity, there are some things that I feel very confident speaking towards and leading the parade. And there are other times when I know that it's my duty to clear the way so others can have a parade. I not need to have the microphone in my mouth, but I definitely want other people to be able to have a mic during their time.
Mm.
So for me, authenticity is just knowing where I fall on different spectrums and being okay with that, okay with that.
Wow, that's really powerful. Sometimes I need to hold the mic and speak, and sometimes my job is to make sure somebody else has the mic when they need it.
Mhm.
The authenticity
Because
isn't
I think a
completely
lot of times,
narcissistic.
yeah. hmm Sometimes, people, they think that you have these titles and they're like, oh, you're a diversity warrior. Yes, but what that actually means and what people think it means, the perception, they're not they don't equate, right?
Hmm.
The impact could be damaging if I sit there and think that I can speak to everything diversity inclusiveness, right? But thankfully, I have a resource bank of people that I could connect others with and still promote what they're doing.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I love it. And coming back to that tension of I live my truth. Authenticity is living and speaking my truth and having emotional awareness, which I'm hearing you, I think, imply knowing how much is enough in given situations, or how much to
Mhm.
be or show or say. Is that what you're saying, that there's a tension, a
Yes,
balancing act there?
definitely, because you can't go. You have to meet people where they are. I forgot who it was that said that, and sometimes you have to leave them there. But I choose to leaving them there as a last resort, right? I want to meet people where they are, and sometimes people think that authenticity is bluntness, or you say what I say what I want to say, and no, there's a tact that needs to be said. There's a respect that people need to have for you, but you can have tough conversations when people believe that you do what you do from a place of genuineness, right?
Mm.
So it's not really being rude or very demanding with things. You have to allow people, share information with them, and allow them to have their own aha moments, right? Instead of pouring and telling people you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that. Sometimes the stage that you're on is, I will let you be accountable. I will give you examples. And in your mind, we always think, I do that, I say that. It's similar to going to church when the preacher preaches about something and you're like, he is talking to me.
Mm.
God, get it, right? This sermon today was for no one else but me. You have to have your aha moments, because when other people are telling you, it's falling on deaf ears. So I think that the tension comes in when people are not as accepting of your wealth of knowledge, or the way things are supposed to or should happen in an equitable and genuine and using a moral compass. And you don't necessarily need to argue every day. You can simply present the facts and say, chew on it a little bit,
Mm.
and we'll go back
Mm.
and let them pick up the learning for themselves. So that takes everybody off the defense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great, and it's leading me right into the next thing I really wanted to talk about, which is, if we're going to call authenticity this thing or this idea or group of ideas, what's the trope of
Mm-hmm.
authenticity? What's the fake idea of authenticity? It started leading us there, saying things, like some people think authenticity is just about being blunt and having a hard
Mm-hmm.
edge. And here's my truth. I don't care if you like it or not. I don't care if it
Yeah,
means something. And you're saying, no, there's a softness and
there is.
a love that starts. But what other things do we think, or do people think authenticity is, that might be helpful for us to
Yeah.
dismantle and say, that's not what we're
I
talking about?
Yeah, I think people get this idea that your authentic people are these outgoing extroverts that get along with everybody, and they bring everybody for these kumbayas, and they're the life of the party. And it's not. It's really not that. I know quite a few extroverts and outgoing people, and people who always appear to be happy and energetic, who are not genuine with things, who that's just their personality. And I don't believe that authenticity is necessarily a personality trait, because I feel like you have to be intentional with it. I feel like it's more of a learned behavior. And so there takes some practice, there takes some accountability into being authentic. It's not this perfective state, or it's not superficial. It's not, oh, I get along with every group you put me in. Okay, then that's, you have a nice personality. People
Mm.
are attracted to you, but you're not necessarily authentic. You might just be a nice person, and you might, who knows what you see when you look in the mirror.
Mm. Wow,
So,
that's powerful. I mean, I think if people walk away with one thing from this interview, the idea that authenticity is not a personality trait, but a learned behavior, that's game changing, because I think you're exactly right. And I hadn't even thought to frame it this way, but we so often associate authenticity with gregarious personalities, outgoing people, because they talk. And so
mhm,
we hear more from them. And so it's easier for us to ascribe characteristics like authenticity to them. But there's this whole group of introverts on the other side of the room who are
right.
deeply authentic people. But you and they may have to work a little harder to get to a place where you know as much about them to understand that. Or they're not going to come up to
Yeah.
your face and say, hey, I'm authentic, check me out.
Because at its core, I really think that authenticity, why I say it's a learned behavior, is because I believe it takes courage, strength, and active listening,
Hmm.
right? We may not be the ones who always talk, but we definitely have to listen. Going back to, you have to listen to yourself. You have to have the courage to kind of take that mask off and say, I have flaws, but my flaws and my journey can help someone else. I'm not standing up here all the time, perfect. Um, we're in COVID-19. Half the Zoom calls that I've been on, you're fortunate, Daniel, because I actually have some makeup and glasses and stuff. The Zoom calls that I've been on, I've either kept my camera off, or I've, had my 2-strand twist that we're showing and that we're wonderful, because it was just this time of, we're trying to process so many things going on in the world right now, and appearance is the last of it. So people were definitely getting the black girl magic. If they were like, could you please turn your camera on? Sure. This is us. This is my craziness during stay-at-home orders and working. So, but it takes strength to be that, because there are some people who are like, I'm not turning my camera on for anything. There's an image, right? And we all have images, but I want people to feel comfortable being who they are. And we don't always have it together all the time. You know,
Yeah.
there are things that happen, and you just go with it.
Hmm. Well,
That's
this
being authentic.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, you are like building bridges for me from one question to the next that I have. Um, because thinking about, I don't have it all together and I've got to make an intentional decision about whether I turn my camera on, for instance, during this meeting, even though I'm not made up the way I would be if I went into the office physically, or whatever the
Mhm.
situation is. You're making decisions. So my question is, how do you make decisions about what is authentically you and things that you want to be, do, and say, versus what's oversharing and sort of a mad grab at authenticity, but is actually, I'm imagining, we're speaking to young professionals, people who are making their way in the workplace and are doing well and want to grow the scope of their influence and impact. And their authenticity is such a buzzword right now. And so people know I'm supposed to be authentic. And for a lot of people,
Mhm.
I think we don't know how to make good intentional or strategic decisions about where the balance is between being your authentic self and sharing raw transparency in
Right.
healthy ways, and just, I spill my guts to every person in the
Right.
hallway on every Zoom call. mistaken
There's
thinking that.
right. There's definitely what is what people call relational transparency, right? So it goes back to listening again. You have to know what type of relationship you have with people and how much of a candid conversation you can have, right? So I believe authenticity is saying and holding people accountable and doing things that are right. However, it's how you say it. Like you wouldn't talk to your spouse or your partner the same way you would talk to your president, right, of your company or something, but you can get the same message across. You can have the same type of conversation. So if it's relational transparency versus oversharing, I think you have to be accurate, do things in a timely manner to establish that trust, get a feeling of the situation and how you're going to own it and your part, and don't overshow or don't be careful with the emotional part of it. You can be emotional, and sometimes it's appropriate to show emotions, but you really have to know what group you're with, right? So there's a certain amount of vulnerability that underlies authenticity. And I believe when it comes to a point where when you establish this relational transparency with people, they trust you to go into the rooms on their behalf, and they understand that you can't share everything because there's this trust that you've been on their side, you've told them and been honest even if you weren't on their side, so they take the bad news because it's from you. Yeah. We've all been in that situation where person A can tell us something, constructively criticize us because we trust them and have a different relationship and we know their narrative, and person B can't tell us anything, because of the relationship we have with them when they're both sharing the same information. Yeah. So it's the relational transparency that you have with people. And that's what makes you okay when it's not time to overshare, when you have those conditions that this is a need to know basis. And right now, just trust that I'm advocating for you, or I have your best interest. However, while I'm working on them or this situation, you work on this, you work on the bluntness, you work on the tact, right? Let's get you to some tact as you move forward in your journey, and where that happy medium is, and encourage them to have the conversations with themselves. Because we're quick to talk to others and tell others what they do wrong. It takes strength to sit there and look at yourself and say, hey, you're great at this, but you really need to work on this. And it's not them, it's you.
Yeah.
It's tiring trying to be 50 people at one time, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I've been there, done that. That's a constant struggle, right? Trying to be all things to all people as a person who speaks and convenes and makes a living being in the room with people. Yes. There's a real pressure to feel like you have to be, or their perception is that you must be everybody's best friend in the room all the time. And, you can't live with that kind of pressure. One of the practical metrics I feel like I heard you saying in terms of the intentional decision whether to sort of share or not, or where the oversharing starts, is, do I trust this person enough to not reshare this in a room where they wouldn't reshare it? If you're crossing that line, if there's not enough trust in that space for where you feel like this person has earned my tears, has earned my vulnerability, has earned the rawness by keeping that confidentiality when needed or whatever. Oversharing is, I'm going to ignore that boundary line. Being authentic is, I'm going to pay attention to that boundary, and people who have earned my trust get it, and people who haven't yet just don't. And that doesn't mean I don't like them. They just haven't earned my trust yet. Is that
or even beyond trust? There's just some things when it comes to being in certain positions, not even necessarily of leadership, but in certain positions, you can't tell everything, right? And there's some things that are only on a need to know basis, and you need to be okay with knowing that this is what I can tell you, but trust me enough to know that until you get your seat at the table, because I hate to say when people are like, well, I don't have a seat at the table, but until you get there, right? So you don't have a seat at the table now.
Mm.
You can build your own table. So, you don't have a seat at the table now. So until you get there, trust me enough to have the conversations with the others who are there and know that I'm looking out for you and what's fair, and everybody who has a voice being comfortable. Because there's also people around the table who are not comfortable. They're just there.
Mm. Mm.
Whether it's to check boxes or they're just there.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so good, because the way I just framed it was kind of I trust you or not, and that can turn into a deficit model. Like these people are less than because they haven't earned my trust. And what I hear you saying is an added metric is it's not just about trust or this person's in a deficit with me.
Right.
They may not just need to know this information in a totally sort of neutral vacuum. They just don't need this information. It won't be helpful to them. It will break somebody else's confidentiality or the organizational mission, vision, goals in some way. That's a lot to balance, but it's a really different thing than showing up at work in your slippers and pajamas and saying whatever and doing whatever you want, mistakenly thinking this is being authentic. You're really talking about intentional, strategic decision-making and learned behavior, which is helpful because you're debunking the myth that it's magic. Some people just have it and some people don't.
And you know what? I'll share this with you, Daniel. So in my 30s, maybe close to 40s, but at least the past 10 or 15 years, I have really been intentional with things, and I adopted core values, things that I was noticing. There were things that were very prevalent every step of my journey that I have taken since probably middle school. And I really looked at, strategic plans were coming into fruition and everybody wanted a strategic plan for their business. And I was like, you know what? I'm a professional, but I think I need a strategic plan for my life. And it was the way that I balance if things are going to work out for me. And I would say for the past 10, 15 years, they really have. And I call it the 4 I's. And it's funny because when I interviewed for the position that I'm in now, when I started, one of the people were like, oh gosh, you're the girl who had the 4 I's. I'm glad I picked you. And I'm like, wow, like everything that happened in a day on campus, and she remembers my eyes. But my eyes are basically, things have to be intentional, right? If you're a take it or leave it type of person, we probably won't work well together. Because if you can leave it, I'll tell people all the time, then leave it. Leave it and let us people who are intentional about the work, intentional about the services, intentional about the project, let us work and try to build a foundation. So if you're not intentional, if this is just something you're doing just because, it's probably not going to be what people call a good fit for me. Immersive. Before the Cleveland Cavs had it, I'm an all-in type of person. I straddle fences well. I'm either all in or I'm like, that's just not going to work for me right now. And I'll pass it, which comes with being comfortable who you are and knowing what you're good at and what you're not. So it has to be intentional. It has to be immersive. It has to be inclusive. Are we equity minded, especially in the work that I do? So many times, and you do as well, people think that diversity is just about putting all the others over there and making them feel comfortable. And it's like, if we're not working on advancing the beliefs and the ideals and the work of the majority, then we're already working in a deficit. We're only, resegregating people. We're doing it all over. We're going backwards instead of forwards. It's to see how everybody can do this work together. And it has to be done with integrity. Right? It has to. If my name is associated with it in any type of way, there has to be some element of integrity. And I am fine with saying no. And it took me a while to get there, because when people are telling you, you need to do this, if you want to succeed in this field, you're going to need to do this, you're going to need to be that, some things aren't true to me, right? They don't fit me. It's like the one size fits all dress and I'm a full figure. It fits most. It doesn't fit me. It doesn't look on me as it looks on my mom, who's a size 8, right? So it doesn't fit all. I have to make things fit me. So there are times when I have to adjust and know what works.
Mm.
So always, my strategic plan is my 4 eyes. And if I can look at a job or look at a relationship or look at a nonprofit board work or look at, work in the community, if it's something that I can check off my 4 eyes, then that's my core values. That's my strategic plan. We can go. But if there's some questions about any of those, it just doesn't work.
Mm.
And that's fine. That's me working on my authenticity and being true to the girl in the mirror.
Yeah.
So I encourage everybody to look at themselves and to develop, come up with something that works for you and stand by it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're not just talking about a system of, do I say this or not at work, or do I wear this or not on casual Friday? You're talking about, do I accept this chief officer position or not? Do I sit on this board as a community influence? I mean, you're talking about high level
Right.
influence and impact decisions still getting put through the strainer of your 4 eyes, which are about Lisa looking at Lisa in the mirror and
Mhm.
knowing she's still Lisa,
Right.
which is
Because
awesome.
coming up, people told me, they were like, you have to do board work. You have to get in on this. You have, and so I felt compelled to, like, the first time I was offered a role to serve on a board, to be like, yes, I need to get board work. If I'm going to be successful, I need to get on a board. And it took a lot for me to sit there and be like, this isn't me. This isn't something I'm passionate about. I don't really go to their dinners. It's not that they're not a good board. It's just not something I would feel comfortable speaking to and be. But in my mind, I kept hearing some of my mentors, like, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to go here. And I was like, But when I turned that one down, I was able to be positioned to work as volunteers and stuff. And eventually, I got on boards about stuff that I was passionate with. And it was authentic. It was a natural transgression or it was a natural journey, because I started there in the unnoticed role, right? I wasn't looking for my name on the website or, to see their records and everything and be in the pictures. I really did the work because it was important to me.
Mm.
Sometimes being authentic, you have to do the work that's important to you.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to tie this to a close, because I wanted to say, I just love you and I love the work that you're doing.
Ditto, like, you are my favorite person, So.
Oh, well, thank you so much. You've given us a lot to chew on, and I want to just say thank you so much for lending us your time and your expertise. Will you just say one more time quickly the 4 eyes so that people can kind of walk away from this conversation with those?
Sure. Inclusive, immersive, intentional, and with integrity.
That's so good.
Mhm.
Lisa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so
And
much, Daniel.
I can't wait to see you in person again.